if I'm not to hurt all sentient beings, things that have got a consciousness, then should I be eating them? In other words, having somebody else kill them for me so I can consume them? Why are people not listening? Right? If your gut is the ears to the cosmos and we already understand intuition, why aren't people listening? And my message there was, people are drowning out the messages, right, by muffling their ears. If you want this, then what will that look like? What will that sound like? What will it taste like? What will it smell like? What will it feel like? What will it think like? Because that's how you need to align yourself with that. That's all becoming consciousatarian. It's all becoming conscious.
Welcome everybody to another Martial Mind Power podcast. I'm Jatinder Palaha here with Sifu Lak, and today we're going to be dropping some more wisdom bombs. Sifu Lak, how are you doing?
Doing very well, thank you. And yourself?
Yes, very good, thank you. Very good, thank you. Just getting ready for the new year, and just planning whatever needs to be done in regards to that. So Sifu, today you said you've got a topic you wanted to cover.
Yes, I actually have chosen a koan from the book, and from the book, The Art of Thinking Without Thinking. So I want to share the koan. The koan is one word, and this word is, and if you pick up this book, you'll realize that I like making up words. And so it's a word that I've made up, and hasn't every single word been made up, and they continually continue to be made up, and that's how language evolves. You look at kind of street slang, for instance, it's constantly evolving. Our new generations are innovative, and they're always making up words. There's probably 101 words for the same thing, in certain aspects and areas of life, and so it goes. But the key thing is this koan is based on a word that I've made up, and this word is consciousatarian. Okay, if I could say that properly myself, right? So it's a diagram. It's an image of a man, right, with a very cosmic background, with cosmic clouds and so on. And this man has got his hand up in front of his face, palm facing outwards, with his thumb and his index finger opened, and one of his eyes peeking through. Okay, so in other words, he's looking through his mind's eye, through the inside of his hand. Okay, the gap through his fingers, should I say? Now, consciousatarian. Okay, consciousatarian, and I wanted to talk about this for a reason. But before we go into all of that, I thought, let's give you a chance, Mr. JT, to see if anything came to you as part of
Consciousatarian. Well, obviously, the first thing I thought about was food, right when I heard about that. So I started to consume the idea of it. And what comes up in regards to the conscious side of it is probably about, when we do things in life, are we doing it from a automated, robotic kind of point of view, or are we actually doing some conscious thinking behind what we're doing? And it's about being conscious about what we're doing, I think, is probably what it's about.
Oh, you're on the right lines. You're on the right lines. And
I know you made it up. I don't know what you mean, mate.
Well, you do know what I mean, because you're on the right lines. You see, this whole idea of consciousatarian came up from people asking, are you a pescatarian? Are you a vegetarian? Are you a vegan? and so on. And that got me thinking. Yeah, just over 5 years ago, I had my own spiritual awakening, and as part of that process, I was compelled to stop hurting other sentient beings and Mother Earth and other people, and that includes animals of all forms, fish, insects, and so on. And it got me thinking. As part of that, as part of that compulsion was, if I'm not to hurt all sentient beings, things that have got a consciousness, then should I be eating them? In other words, having somebody else kill them for me so I can consume them. And then, that whole conversation goes down to, well, what about, animal products like dairy products, eggs and milk and cheese and all of that kind of stuff, including ice cream, for instance. So, some of those things that I love, such as ice cream, I don't know anyone that doesn't love ice cream, but it did get me thinking about that. And, I went through, prior to that, a long period of time of thinking, how would I do this? And just before I decided to, first of all, stop eating meat, I went on a bit of a meat binge, right? So, all right, let me just get my fix. I mean, in the end, you can only eat so much, right? Meat, you can only eat so much food at any sitting, right? So I wasn't, in effect, over consuming. I'd just consume what I would normally just, choose meat because this was going to be it. But I got to the point where I was like, well, what am I doing? This is the whole point of not to do it. And then I had another spiritual experience whereby I got violently ill. This was after I'd given up meat, but I was still eating fish and dairy and so on. And I got violently ill on lobster, believe it or not. And during the meditation, the message came through clearly. Now you need to give up fish as well. So I gave up eating fish. So there goes my pescatarian, angle. Before it was like just vegetarian, and then it was pescatarian because I was still eating fish. And then that went out the window, so it's just vegetarian. So now it's like, okay, you're down to eggs and milk. So, and then it was like, well, what was that?
You became an eggetarian.
Yeah, eggetarian. Yeah. So eggetarian, milkatarian, right? So, so while I was in this stage of dairyatarian, right, I thought, well, you know what? Now, there's a lot of chickens that are suffering to produce these eggs because they're farmed and they're forced to go through inhumane conditions in order to just keep popping out eggs, and it's not right. So I gave up eggs, and then eventually it was kind of like the rest of the dairy products like milk and so on. And then it was like, okay, for the most part, I gave up milk and you started substituting that with the other options. Now this, you got to remember, like 4 or 5 years ago, there weren't that many alternatives, right? Mm-hmm. Soya was probably it. And in terms of milk alternatives, it was just soya milk at that time. But you know what? Despite all the odds, I thought, well, I'm going to do this, okay? Because this is a higher calling for me to move in this direction. And this doesn't mean that it's for everybody. I'm just talking about myself. So, and this doesn't make me better than anybody else. It's just where I was at that time. And so I decided, okay, I'll shed that and I start to consume my food. And this is where, coming back to what came to you, as in like you went straight into the food zone because of the atarian at the end of that. I started to make conscious choices around that. But ultimately, there was one thing that was always bugging me, and that was this. That was if there were chickens that were respected, looked after, and they laid eggs, okay, through a natural process, then there's no harm in eating those eggs, because those eggs are, if I was to say it, it's the equivalent to the chicken's menstrual cycle. It's just an unfertilized egg, right? That's ejected by the chicken. So nothing's going to happen about that. It is literally waste product after that, right? So if I had a desire to eat eggs and it was done ethically with morality and consciousness, then I don't see any reason why you can't do that, because you're not going to hurt the animal as a consequence. Then it got me thinking about, well, what happens if you were up in the Amazon and, not a lot of people know this, but the Amazon bed is made of clay. So all the trees, they grow on top of the clay, and they have like tripod-like roots that sit on the clay, because obviously clay doesn't absorb water. So in order to grow, the vegetation sits on top of the clay, which makes it extremely difficult to farm the land in the Amazon, right? So there's not a lot of farmland produce that's produced by the local villages and tribes and so on there. They do in very small controlled areas, but it's very difficult. Okay. So there's a large dependency on fishing. Okay. Mm-hmm. But if you was in an area like that, and that's your food source, or only reliable food source, and you've got clean water in which the fish live, and you have to do it for survival, then catch what you need, what is necessary, right? Then you'd have to do that. Mm-hmm. Okay. You'd have to do that. So I thought, well, actually, it's not black and white. This whole thing's not black and white. And then it got me thinking about, well, if you, so like, in Sikhi, our gurus, right? When Guru Gobind Singh Ji was in battle, when they were in battle, obviously they're not necessarily around farm produce, they're in transit. And when they're in transit, they would have to hunt and eat. Okay. That was an exception to the rule. Even our gurus consumed meat when they had to, right? And it was an absolute had to, not a luxury choice. Yeah. So they did consume meat in that respect, okay, for survival. So it got me thinking about that. And then it got me thinking about, from the last 5, maybe even 6 years, right, more and more meat and dairy alternatives started to appear on the shelves. Why? Because people started to stir consciously. I really believe there's a big spiritual shift going on, and people are waking up. And as they're waking up, they are moving from farmed food produce that includes meat, fish, and even plants, vegetables and fruits and so on, in some cases, right, to healthier options, okay? So soya, tofu, for instance, and so on. There's loads of alternatives, loads of chicken alternatives, and what I call transient foods. Transient foods being foods that take you from meat and fish and eggs to non-meat, fish, egg-based products that are based on soya and tofu and the like, right? And there's so many options now that you can buy sausages that are meat-free. You could buy burgers that are meat-free. You could buy, you can even go to Nando's and get imitation chicken wraps, right? They call it the imitator wrap, for instance. Yeah, honestly, right? Now, if you ever ate meat or ever ate chicken and you had that, you'd realize actually it's got a very similar consistency. If you weren't to be too critical about it, you wouldn't notice much of a difference. All right. And in some cases, such as Richmond's, now Richmond's, they've always specialized in sausages, pork sausages, and now they do meat-free sausages. Their meat-free sausages are better than the pork sausages they used to do. And because I know, because used to be a meat eater and now I'm not, right? And they taste better. In fact, when you give these alternatives to your mates that still eat meat, they actually say the same thing. So, right? So they think, wow, you know. And a mutual friend of ours, Suki, right? His daughter is a connoisseur on meat-free products, right? And this was one of the recommendations I was able to give Suki to help share with his daughter, which she probably already knows about it. And then on the milk front, for instance, right? You know, the cows, you know, they go through a lot of hardship, you know, especially the female cows, you know, the moment they're born and ready to rear children, they remain pregnant for the rest of their lives so they can keep producing milk. Remember, only pregnant, you know, cows that have given birth lactate, therefore give milk. And if they're in a continuous cycle of being impregnated and giving birth, they're always going to give milk, right? And until they die. And then the animal is then used for meat products such as burgers and so on, and mince and so on. So it's a horrible existence. Look, I get it. People like meat, and that's okay. This is not hating against anybody that likes meat, just sharing my process. So now, like, you got companies like Beyond Burger that do this, what I call a transitionary food, right? That do a burger that tastes like beef, right? So there's days when, you know, I'll have a Beyond Burger and I'll feel sick because it feels like I'm eating meat, right? I can't eat it. On certain days, I can't eat it. Right. And actually, I'm getting to a point where it's like, now, look, if I'm going to have a burger, I might as well have a veggie burger that's filled with vegetables because it's more satisfying because, you know, it is what it is. But these transitionary foods are there to help people wean them away from killing animals and fish and so on. Have a zero impact on that. So, you know, this is how the whole consciousatarian idea first started. It started with food, and that's, you're 100% right in starting there. But then, you know, the question was, okay, so now what I'm doing is I'm moving away from meat and fish and even dairy for the most part. And consuming consciously, okay? But am I consuming consciously? Am I really consuming consciously? And then we went through this whole movement of reducing plastic bags, okay? Right? And I thought, hold on, there's something else happening here. You know, there was a ridiculously high number of plastic bags that were used by these supermarkets on a monthly basis, on an annualized basis, racking up into millions, billions of plastic bags that were just making their ways into, eventually making their way into kind of landfill and so on, and into the ocean. That, you know, you had to start paying for it, which I think the government did a great thing where it said, all right, now you have to pay for a plastic bag because now it makes you conscious. Why does it make you conscious? Because people are more concerned about money than the planet and the oceans and other sentient beings.
Mm.
hit them where it hurts, which is the money, and they'll act more consciously than just telling them this is suffering you're causing. How bizarre is our human race that unless you hit them in the pocket, they're not going to realize. Okay. So that started happening. And I thought, wow, this is brilliant. So you start getting this whole thing with Bag for Life, right? Where you had like a material-based textile bag, which you just carry around, or you even had a harder, more rugged plastic bag, which would last longer than a typical plastic bag, and so on. And the idea was you keep it, you store it, you use it, you empty it, you store it, and repeat the cycle. And I thought that's brilliant. So that started happening. You started getting all these milk alternatives. You went from soya to now you got oat, you got hemp, and God knows whatever.
Coconut, almonds.
Coconut, almond, exactly, right? And there's so many options now that you're spoiled. You're spoiled. So if you're going to move into a non-milk or you become lactose intolerant, right? And now you have to look at shopping for other options. You're spoiled for choice. Now the option, now when you go to a supermarket, you're like, all right, which one shall I choose? So, and also, don't just look in the milk section for those people that are looking for milk alternatives. Also look in the UHT section, right? Which is a long-lasting product section, because you have loads of milk products in that section because they last 6 months, 12 months. They don't go off as quickly as they say milk does, right? After a few days. So that started happening. So, all right, okay. So now I'm starting to tidy up the way I consume, as in eat and drink, and shop, as in consuming plastic bags. But what about everything else? And then I started, and for a long time, I've been doing this before I became a consciousatarian, was switching the tap off when I brush my teeth or have a shave, just fill up the sink and so on. So I started become aware of saving water long before this happened. But this all ties into that because you're consuming water, right? In fact, the amount of water that you waste if you just leave the tap on is ridiculous. And a lot of that water it can be recycled when it goes through the system. But if you put some pollutants, something in there, then it won't be. Okay. So we have to be careful. We've only got a finite, I think something like 1% of the water on Mother Earth is drinkable, right? It's something ridiculously low. I've got all the statistics in the Master Your Life book on the Be Like Water section, right? If you want more information on that. So I start to become conscious on how I'm consuming water, how I'm using water, okay? Even if I wash a car or a motorbike or, I've got a jet wash. So it switches the water off, doesn't keep the water running, stuff like that. So all of a sudden now this consuming starts to widen, right? Because you constantly consuming. And then through my research, I found, and this was the one that was shocked the most, that the industry which uses and wastes and actually causes water to be unrecyclable, right, is the fashion industry. Fashion industry uses more water than any other industry on the planet. And so if you have got a tendency to buy throwaway clothes, so you buy it for one season, throw it away, buy another, buy more clothes for another season, throw it away, or just buy cheap clothes, which, will degrade quicker than if you bought a quality garment, you're fueling that whole water wastage process, and you're putting more of that water outside of our drinkable reach. That started to get me to think about, okay, and my parents always brought me the values that if you can afford it, buy good quality clothing that will last you, right? Don't buy cheap stuff that then, will rip or tear or just degrade, and then you have to keep replacing it. Okay. Now, there's companies, as we know, that specialize in throwaway clothing. Okay. So the likes of Zara, for instance, really cheap, quick turnaround. H&M, and that other really big one, was it Primark? Yeah,
Primark.
right. Their whole business model is, stack them high, sell them low, and it's all throwaway clothing. So I think we have to be careful that we don't get lured into this whole consumerism, right? Consumerism, and it just doesn't end there. It's everything, anything you use, anything you eat or drink, right? Anything that you're having to throw away a wrapper for is something that you've consumed. Okay, and if you're consuming something, the idea about consciousitarian is starting to become conscious about consuming, right? So you have the minimum or no impact on other sentient beings, including humans, animals, fish, insects, whatever, right? And Mother Earth. That's the whole idea here.
Yeah? No, definitely. I mean, it's interesting because what you're alluding to there, which people may not make a connection to, because until you bring it to their attention, is that there's a synchronicity there. I mean, like whatever's going on this planet is influencing the things around us. Like bumblebees, they talk about bees, right? That if the bee population died, humanity would be gone after a certain period of time because the pollination doesn't happen, a knock-on effect. And in the same context, in the same vein, like water is one of those things. I mean, like you said, it is a very low percentage of water that's actually drinkable, right? And in order to refine seawater to become drinkable is like, it costs so much money. I think there's only one place in the planet that does it, somewhere in Dubai, I think, which does it. But they're still putting lots of petrol to grind the engines and whatnot to be able to push the water through the systems in order to make it drinkable on the other side. Yeah. That's a crazy process. That's why it's not been like done in the grand scheme yet, because they can't separate the salts from the water, right? So in that kind of context, it's insane to hear. And just that thing about, the things we are doing has an effect. But when we're not told about it, we just kind of go through life just doing whatever. Kids won't know, parents won't know, teachers won't know. If you're not telling people about these things, right, then they're never going to have the awareness of it. But if they can relate to and understand that actually our actions, what we're doing in a local level, like you said, the way you're saving water, you can save on electricity, you can save on recycling garbage and all that kind of stuff, will have a knock-on effect on pretty much everything. And then the whole thing you said about the animals, I mean, the way they're being treated so you can consume them, just makes you wonder, right? Like we know that when a human being gets scared, we release certain chemicals and they go into the body, for example, right? What's happening with animals? There's studies to suggest that chemicals are being released because they're put under so much stress. Yeah. So that affects the meats, and then people are consuming it. What kind of effect would it have on your body versus something that hasn't gone through that kind of process and has been more of a kind of, what they call it, a good exchange in a kind of ethical way, right?
But you know what? You've just mentioned something that's quite important, and that is when I went to the Amazon, and out of 10 days, 11 days in the Amazon, one day or 2 days we had chicken. Okay, this was when I was still eating meat, and when they just before they kill the chicken, they thank the chicken for giving its life. And this chicken was roaming. These chickens, they've had half a dozen chickens that just roam around and just feed off the land, and designated area that they had, and it was huge. So they were happy, right? In hindsight, I wouldn't do that again. But when they did kill the chicken, they thanked the chicken for giving its life for us to consume it. And one thing that I was told, when you kill an animal ritually in order for it to give you sustenance and food, so it can become part of your consciousness, that animal goes quiet and calm. right? And therefore, it doesn't die in panic and fear. When an animal dies in panic and fear, right, all of that trauma that's in the animal, right, which is dumped into its system through the chemicals, and every cell of its body, every cell's got consciousness, it remembers the trauma. So when you eat flesh from an animal that's gone through trauma, and now it doesn't matter what kind of meat it is, what kind of animal it is, right? When you eat that, you're absorbing all of that trauma. You don't realize you are literally absorbing all of the worst emotions that that animal suffered prior to its dying. And if it suffered throughout its life, that trauma is still there as well. You are absorbing all of that by eating it, right? And you don't realize this. This is why meats, they say that in the spiritual world, right? For if you wanted to ground yourself because you're up in the clouds, right? Or up in the cosmos, you want to ground yourself, eat meat. Why? Because it's got low vibration. It'll bring you right down to earth, right down to the lowest vibration, right down, right? So you can actually utilize it to have that effect, right? And a lot of people wouldn't even think that's a thing, but it's a thing. I'm telling you, I've experienced it. Yeah. And I've been advised by spiritual masters around this. So when you think about things like this, you think, wow, I didn't even know that was a thing. That I didn't know that was a possibility. So when you're eating things, make sure you're eating things that are happy. And we also know, and it's also been scientifically proven time and time again, and especially when you've got these, Guinness Book of World Records kind of deals where, the person that's grew the biggest pumpkin in the world, or they have these, big growing competitions.
Yeah.
The plants that grow the biggest are the ones that get the most loving.
Yeah. The ones that be nurtured the most, yeah. Be
nurtured the most, right? You end up, the gardeners, they speak to the plant, they play music to the plant, and they play nice, uplifting music to the plants, maybe even chants and meditation. They'll make sure they're watered, make sure they get enough sunshine, make sure they get enough nutrients and minerals and vitamins in order to grow properly, right? These plants are the ones that grow the healthiest, grow the biggest, grow the strongest, right? Now, technically, even animals that we would consume, they also eat plants. So technically, I think we've spoke about this before, technically, doesn't that make us all plants, right? It's just plants eating other plant eating organisms being eaten by plant eating organisms and other plant eating organisms, right? if you follow me there, right?
Yeah.
So ultimately, right, we're all plants, and therefore, we are subjected to the same process. If you nurture a human being, if you nurture a child, if you nurture a baby will be strong in body, in mind, and in spirit. Okay, if you give them a nice nurturing environment, give them nurturing food, give them TLC, and care for them unconditionally, that child is going to be an all-rounded, healthy individual, right? But then when a child is brought up in a unhealthy environment with unhealthy food and unhealthy thoughts and unhealthy behavior, then what happens is that child ends up being traumatized, and it comes out. That child is not the healthiest in body, mind, or spirit. That child is not the healthiest in the way that child is going to conduct itself in life, and may grow up to be disturbed, right? Not saying you can't change that. Of course you can, but you need to be able to recognize and become aware of that first. And if you don't have the influences or the insight within yourself to be able to do that, then you're on a collision course, and we need to stop that collision course by creating that awareness. And this is where the Consciousatarian is coming in, saying become aware. And this is why I said that this doesn't make anybody better than anybody else. This is not about right or wrong. Righteousness means acting to the highest positive intention given the resources you've got. Now, sometimes you don't have those resources or high level of resources, so you just know what you know and you carry on doing what you're familiar with, okay, until you become aware. And you can change that, okay? So righteousness means traveling your true path, okay? Your true path towards your higher self. We all are embodiment of a higher self, a higher state of consciousness, right? A one consciousness, or God, as you may. And in order to connect and attain a higher state of consciousness, you've got to become in tune with it. In order to become in tune with it, you've got to become aware what it is you need to deprogram and what you're going to reprogram that with. And what is that? That is a new higher state of conscious coding, right? And that's what we're coding you with, or what we're helping provide you with, is that. So, there's no right or wrong. It's just a journey. But in the current state that the world is, in terms of the environment, there's an ongoing concerns about global warming and the climate in the world, floods, typhoons, hurricanes, droughts, and earthquakes, and so on. Forest fires and all this kind of stuff. Historically, it's cyclic. Okay, it's cyclic. The world's gone through these motions time and time again, and we're going through it again. Okay, but it might just be, and you don't want to be, you don't want to be the one that's responsible for triggering that motion, because and being completely blind, and you won't be here, 1,000 years or 500 years or 200 years or 100 years from now to say, look back and say, do you know what? Yeah, we fucked up. Yeah, back then we fucked up, right? We won't have that. We won't have that luxury. The point is take the information that you have now and do something useful with it. Act consciously, so that some future generations, our children, our children's children, our children's children's children, 7 generations down at least, won't be affected. But right now, we can't even fathom what's going to happen in our current generation and whoever's here right now, right? Because we're still operating with this. There's 2 trails of thought. There's those that can have a positive influence in the world, but are running a economic business mindset. Okay, it's all about profit. And I've always said this: profit is loss. When you go after the profit, eventually you're going to trade that off against something, right? You're going to lose something as a consequence. You can't run consciously and think profit, right? It's got to be done unconditionally. And this is the thing, the paradigm that we need to change in people's thinking, is that you can't just think, what's in it for me? Where's the profit? Because you're going to trade something off. You always will trade something off. But if you do something for the greater good, then there is no profit. There's only a win-win for everybody. Okay. And that's not considered a profit. Okay. Everybody benefits, but it's not necessarily financial either. Okay. It's sustainability. It's longevity, right? It's the ability to live life in a healthy environment, on a healthy planet, with healthy water and healthy food, right? And healthy generations that have healthy bodies and healthy mind and a healthy spirit. Otherwise, we are just laying foundations down for traumatized generations that follow this, because we can't fucking see past our own egos, right? And that's unfortunately where we're stuck. So Consciousatarian is saying, hey, you don't have to be a vegetarian. You don't have to be a vegan. You don't have to be a pescatarian. You don't have to be any other type of atarian. Just be a consciousatarian. Consume consciously, not just food, not just drink, anything, whatever you wear, whatever you use, whatever you need, you know, to get through your life on a daily basis, weekly basis, monthly basis, annual basis, and so on, right? Just become consciously aware of, is it having a negative impact anywhere? And if so, is there an alternative where I can reduce that suffering to other sentient beings on Mother Earth?
Yeah. No, absolutely, man. Yeah. This is, you know, you're alluding to the whole kind of synchronicity and living in harmony as well, right? In what you're saying. And there was these two points that you mentioned before, which I wanted to just bring to the surface a bit. Was one you were talking about earlier, where you said, you know, like animals eat plants, humans eat animals and eat plants as well, right? Yeah. So in that scenario, the animal is just like a middleman, right? Do you know what I mean? So, you know, and now we're living in a brilliant time now where we can actually bypass that with what's available and how we're advancing as a human race, right? So that was quite interesting. And then the other thing which is also interesting is like the flip side of it, right? So you were talking about how, you know, when you went to the Amazon, you had your chicken there, right? When you look at consumption and food, there's many cultures that talk about that aspect of it, or like spiritually having a ceremony or some sort before that's done, right? Yeah. But on the flip side of it, hunger, right? Fasting is also a spiritual aspect as well, because there's a point where in many cultures they fast for a certain period of time. It's very heavy in a lot of cultures, right? Where they say that, you know, during that time, your spirituality goes to lose because there's nothing for your body to consume, right? And any junk in the body starts to get out of it as well, and allows you to kind of have a better flow of energy, I suppose, with the spiritual side of stuff, right? So it's interesting because what we're putting into our body can affect the flow of that. And like what you said, if you're doing it consciously, you can actually use it to your benefit, because you would know when you need to ground yourself, for example, and when you could potentially need to be in a spiritual state to do things as well. So it was fascinating to see the synchronicity of that, and how you're saying that there's no necessarily no right or wrong in the scenario, but when you're doing it consciously, there's actual thought going into why you're doing something, and not just consuming on autopilot and just eating junk for the sake of it and making junk around you. So I think that's very important for people to understand, that there is this harmony and synchronicity. And the reason we talk about this is because in martial arts as well, we talk about it all the time. The yin and the yang, the happy and the sad, they work together. Yeah, there's this dance going on, this cosmic dance, right? And we humans do it on this planet as well. And it's brilliant, like the way you're sharing that information, Lex.
Well, you know, just to add to that, one of the divine messages that I received during one of my sittings was your gut. Your gut it is the ears to the cosmos. Okay. Now, and one of the insights that I got when I got that message was, well, why are people not listening, right? If your gut is the ears to the cosmos, and we already understand intuition, why aren't people listening? And my message there was, people are drowning out the messages, right, by muffling their ears. How do you muffle your ears? You overeat. You overeat, okay? You overeat, and your ears to the cosmos stop working, right? If you want to hear messages, you want to get back in tune and in alignment with your intuition, you must make sure you've got a healthy gut. And also, it's best when you do meditate, for instance, when you receive one of many ways in which you can receive intuitive guidance is on an empty stomach, okay? And without, you know, breaking the fast, from the previous day, as in without having breakfast. Okay, because that's what break fast is, breakfast, right? For those of you that didn't put those two things together, right? So don't break the fast. That fast continues from the night before, right? From the evening before, right? You sleep through it, your gut's clean. If you have a chance to have a bowel movement and cleanse and clear out any garbage, right? Then you can sit lightly, okay, right? And then you can connect to the light, all right? And allow your gut, your ears to listen, right? That's what intuition is. It's really important. So be mindful if you are susceptible to overeating, or if you're susceptible to numbing those ears, right? That might be one of the reasons, okay, for that, because something you don't want to hear because you're not ready. But what if you'd made some space, right, and prepared your body to listen? You might be amazed what you're going to hear. And remember, what you're going to hear is there to make you truly amazing, right? Your intuition will never harm you, will never hurt you. It's there for you to be the ultimate amazingness, right? To be complete awesomeness, right? And to be awesomeness, right, is to allow your divine guidance, right? Your intuition to lead you, right? So if you're drowning it out, you're substandard, right? You're playing yourself down. Don't do that to yourself, right? You deserve more. You deserve the best. But to deserve the best, sometimes we need to go through the worst, right? Right. So if you feel like you've gone through a really bad period and maybe a worse period, right? Then take that and be better for it, because now's the time. Now is the time to do it. And the reason, I'm a firm believer of not having a New Year's resolution. I'm a firm believer of setting new goals and aiming for higher achievements, should I say, rather than goals. Aiming for higher achievements all the time, because the moment I've reached a certain height, I want to aim higher. Why? Because it's infinite. Okay. There is no limit, right? There is no glass ceiling, because the whole idea is to break through it, if there is one, or just completely remove it. This is where, I love one of Bruce Lee's quotes where he says, he hated the idea of people saying, think outside the box, because, it gives you the picture of a box in your mind's eye. And even if you're outside of it, it's very difficult to ignore the inside of the box, which you end up falling back into. Bruce's idea was being at the center of a circle without a circumference. And therefore, you go whichever direction you want, because nothing's holding you in. There is no fence. There's no boundary. There's no limit. Okay. So just be mindful of that. And with consciousness, there is no limit. You can continuously evolve. That's what we're here for. So this is by no means judgmental to anyone that is consuming meat and fish, or changes their clothes often, or doesn't carry a bag for life when they go to the supermarket, whatever. I get it. Sometimes you forget, right, to pack it, or to empty it, or to put it back in your car when you go to the supermarket, and you go like, well, I've got too many items to actually grab them. Because for those people that are trying hard, sometimes they'll be walking around with stuff falling all over the place. But there comes a point where it's like, all right, well, actually, you know what? This is a one-off time where I do need to buy a bag, but I'm going to use it several times after that. Okay. So there's no right or wrong, guys. Right? It's not anybody's better than you, and no one's saying that. And I get it. There's a huge kind of like clique of people, right, that do hate on meat eaters, for instance. Like there's, vegans get a bad rap, and the reason for that is I think
they get a bad rap.
A bad chicken imitator, right? They get a bad rap, I think, because they're part of the vegan movement was to create awareness, but it wasn't done out of love. It was done out of hatred. Guess what happens, right? Meat is going to say, fuck you, man.
Yeah,
all right.
Exactly.
I'll eat what I want. Who the fuck do you think you are? Right. Consciousness. If you're going to become a vegan, right, and you want to share the ideals of being a vegan, then you must do it with love, because you've got to get other people to fall in love with the ideology, not hate it. That's the fucking complete opposite effect that you're creating.
Exactly.
Right? That's the complete opposite effect. So why would you do that? You're gonna have more people stay away from that and actually hate on vegans. All right. So
hate creates the hate. And we were talking about synchronicity and harmony. It works in two directions, isn't it? Because if you can be harmonious and actually just consciously even think about where the other person's coming from, is going to put you in a much more healthier relationship and communication with the other person as well.
That's right. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And you know what? You've just kind of alluded on the communication element of being conscious, right? And again, you consume information consciously or unconsciously, right? So when one of my favorite quotes is, when you talk, you're just repeating something you already know, but when you listen, you're learning something new, right? So as part of the communication, are you being conscious in your communication, right? Are you being conscious? Are you really listening to someone, or are you just there pretending because actually you're not interested in what they got to say anyway, but you're not trying to be rude at the same time, right? So that happens as well, right? Or are you just plain not listening and you just got done rude? right? So, everything that you're consuming through all your different senses, right? Your sight, your hearing, your taste, your smell, right? Your touch. It's all consumption of information, right? Or consumption of food, okay? In some ways, if you listen to bad news, you're consuming bad news. Is that a good idea, right? Is it making you sick? Is it making you anxious? Is it making you nervous? If it is, then switch off the TV. Don't listen to the news. Switch off your news notifications on your smartphone, right? Just don't listen to it. Don't consume that information. If it's really that important, somebody will eventually get it to you, right? Be careful what you're looking at, be careful, what you want to see in the world. If you want to see devastation and destruction, then put your attention there. You'll see plenty, right? If you want to see nurturing and growth and health and wealth, then put your attention there, because that's what you'll see. And your world becomes the sense gratification experiences you immerse yourself in, right? So what kind of experience do you want? And this comes back to, crafting the life that you want. Do you want a life that is full of trauma and tragedy, or do you want a life that is full of prosperity and joy? It's a choice. But if you want this, then what will that look like? What will that sound like? What will it taste like? What will it smell like? What will it feel like? What will it think like? Okay. Because that's how you need to align yourself with that. That's all becoming consciousatarian. It's all becoming conscious. It's consumption. It starts with consumption, right? And you don't realize the effects permeate in every area of your life. Okay.
No, definitely, man. But that just kind of brings that whole idea of how Bruce used to talk about self-actualization, getting to a point where you can realize one's own potential. But all it really requires is for you to just be quiet and listen to the sounds around you, and then listen to what's going on within you. And like you said, choose how do you want it to be, as opposed to how you don't want it to be, and then focusing on the don'ts as opposed to what you do want, right? So a practical example of that could be somebody saying, oh no, the bills are coming through, or the bills are coming through, and they keep focusing on the bills coming through, as opposed to, I've made 5 sales today, which is giving me X amount. There's a different thinking going on. So you got that choice to how you consume that information, how you respond back to it as well.
I think another quite powerful example that I've enjoyed over the years is I contracted, and I was an IT contract for many years, and you can imagine the tax bills, pretty sizable. And initially, I was like, "Oh man, I'm paying a lot of tax." But then a really good friend of mine and a philosopher himself, he turned around to me and said, "Like, you want to wish to pay as much taxes as possible, which means you're earning as much as you possibly can at that given moment in time, right? So more tax you're paying, the more you're earning, right? Yeah. Wish to pay high taxes, therefore you're earning a lot, okay? Mm-hmm. And this is just spinning around the way you look at things, okay? Or you can focus on the taxes and say, there are people out there that don't want to earn a lot because they don't want to get taxed, right? So what they're technically saying is, I'm going to settle for less of a life, less of an existence, and less choices that I can have in my life by limiting my income, so I don't have to pay tax, because I hate the idea of tax, but embrace the idea of tax and blow out that limit, right? And really go out and put yourself out there and grow. And
that's a good New Year's resolution to have, isn't it? I'm going to pay the highest tax bill I've ever paid in my entire life.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, 100%. Let's lock that in right now. Yeah. So yeah, there was something else I wanted to say, but it's oh yes. There's the other thing I wanted to say was, when you're consuming information as well, because we can access information readily, very easily, is do your research and make informed decisions. Okay, don't regurgitate memes and TikToks and Instagrams and stuff like that. That might be just based on jokes or based on a specific context, but when taken literally, are meaningless or misleading. More importantly, okay, and may have unconscious, or should I say, negative impact. Okay, so just be careful when you're consuming information. Do your research and make what I call an informed decision. Okay, that means actually making an effort to find as much information about that subject or that topic or that issue, or whatever it might be, as possible, and then make your own mind up. That's what being conscious is all about, is you taking ownership and responsibility for making conscious choices, not just being a sheep that's running around after the herd, with in an unconscious way, not knowing, in other words, right? So
and look at both the positives and the negatives, because the drawbacks and the potential of something, because that'll give you more of an informed decision, a more balanced approach to things as well.
Absolutely. So I wanted to finish off by reading the actual koan itself, and the explanation that I've put in there. And the teaching that
before you read that, do you want to just tell which page it is, just in case the listeners want to also get to that page as well?
Absolutely, man. So it's page 119. Okay.
190.
119, 119.
119.
Right. Consciousatarian. And it reads like this. People say, I'm a vegetarian. I don't eat meat and fish, but I do eat eggs. People say, I'm a pescatarian. I don't eat meat, but I do eat fish. People say, I'm a vegan. I do not eat meat, fish, and animal products such as milk, cheese, and eggs. I say, I'm a consciousatarian. And people ask, what is that? And I reply, and this was a long-winded reply that when I used to go to this length of replying, It's a lot simpler now. It's just making conscious choices. But this is what I used to reply back then was, I reduce suffering to sentient beings and Mother Earth by consuming consciously. If I had to hunt animals and fish because no other food source was available, then I would do that with ritual and an honor and only hunt what was needed for my community. If animals were treated with equal rights and respect to humans, then I'd happily eat animal products such as milk, cheese, and eggs, and wonderful products like cakes that contain those ingredients from time to time, right? And in the West, I'm sport for choice, as there's plenty of alternative options to meat, fish, and animal products. So there really is no excuse to cause any suffering to other sentient beings and Mother Earth. In addition to being conscious about all the things I eat and drink, I'm also conscious about all the other things that I consume, which includes, but is not limited to. And this is just a list of stuff. I'll just rattle through these quickly. Avoiding using single-use plastics, switching the tap off when I brush my teeth, partially filling the sink while shaving, avoiding extra time in the shower, using a bag for life when shopping, avoiding plastic and paper straws at restaurants, printing less at work, carrying a refillable water bottle and coffee cup when on the move, recycling, buying fewer clothes, refusing a plastic or plastic bag to carry goods at stores, using public transport, buying organic food, supporting local businesses rather than big chains, avoiding waste and consuming what I need, avoiding mass-farmed ingredients such as palm oil, driving selectively, always looking for environmental and animal-friendly options. That is, I consume everything consciously. That is a definition of being a consciousatarian. Now, most of those examples, are around food, drink, and daily operation. I didn't go into thinking too much then, but we've spoke about that here, and we've expanded.
I can imagine you're pulling out one of your lists, and it just goes on, and you're giving your elevator pitch as to what consciousitarian is.
Well, my explanation now, if somebody asks me, are you a vegetarian? It's like, no, I'm a consciousitarian. The response to that usually is, what does that mean? And it's, I consume consciously.
Yeah.
And I said, I don't eat eggs. I wouldn't otherwise normally eat eggs, but I do like cake. So the rare occasion that I will have cake and it's got egg in it, I'll allow that. I like ice cream, but I don't have ice cream every single day. I don't have every single week. I don't have it every single month. But when I do have it, I'm going to enjoy it on that rare occasion, right? So why not? So what's happened is I'm reducing the suffering, right? And if I'm having that net effect, then that's a positive. People say, oh, well, you drive a sports car that's got, that consumes a lot of petrol. Well, I barely drive it. I probably drove it once every 2 or once every 3 months, and that's it, So, and for the rest of the time, I'd use public transport. So, there's a balance. So you can enjoy everything. That's what I'm saying. You can enjoy everything, but in moderation. And isn't that the key, right? Isn't that the key with everything? Moderation is really the key. When you start becoming mindful about that, when you start becoming aware of it, you can start acting consciously. But it's a decision. Remember, it's a choice. And that choice has to be right for you. You have to be ready to do that. And when you're ready to do that with the right intention, then it will happen with love. When you force into doing it through unwillingness, you'll do it through hate, and you won't maintain that behavior. So when you do it, act with love, love will pour out, right? And that's really all there is to say to it.
Wow. Thank you, Sifu Lak. That has been amazing. Folks, I hope you enjoyed that. And, if you guys are wondering, again, the book is The Art of Thinking Without Thinking. Got reflection going on there. You could check it out on Amazon. Also, you could go to martialmindpower.com, and you're on time. Just feel free to, read through that. And if you guys have any questions, you got any ideas, anything you want us guys to talk about, feel free to reach out and let us know. And on that note, Sifu Lak, we will finish off today's podcast and join them again next time.